Hi, thank you for being here. I'm joined by our First Deputy Police Commissioner, Barbara Lark, and our Chief of Detectives, Dawn Kent. So we wanted to provide some updated information on a critical incident, an officer-involved shooting that occurred on Friday night. As you all have seen now, we have released the body camera video. The Buffalo Police Department has started a YouTube channel, the Buffalo Police Department's YouTube channel, which we will be releasing critical incident videos in the future. The intent of this YouTube channel is to have more public access and continue our effort in transparency. As you've reviewed in the video, an incident occurred on Friday at about 7:15 p.m. where police officers on Broadway observed, pulled up on, witnessed a shooting homicide taking place. The individual involved shot and killed a 63-year-old innocent man in cold blood in front of the laundromat on Broadway at Sears. Police officers immediately gave chase in their police car, going after the running suspect to the adjacent parking lot on Sears. As the officers pulled in their vehicle in that parking lot on Sears, the individual jumped on the hood of the police car and fired one round through the windshield of the police car that was occupied by two officers, Jake McKenzie and Officer Ho Tran. We have come to learn this morning on an examination of the officers' equipment, and it is standard practice in a critical incident to take all of the officers' uniforms and equipment, that Officer McKenzie was struck by the round in his right holster, in his holster. There is a bullet hole in the holster, and there's a mark on his gun as a result of that bullet strike. A slug was recovered at the scene. Officer McKenzie and Tran exited their police vehicle and began giving chase. Officer McKenzie fired several rounds from his department-issued Glock as he exited the police vehicle towards the suspect. The foot pursuit continued on from that point, going down Plater and then cutting through some yards towards Sweet Street, where it's alleged that at that time the suspect fired more rounds at the pursuing officers. The suspect continued over to the next street, Sweet Street, and then cut back through another yard over towards back to Plater, where it began, where the officers engaged the suspect, discharging their firearms and striking the suspect 8 times. Both officers fired their weapons at this secondary scene of the officer-involved shooting. The first scene being where the officers were shot at and where the first officer, McKenzie, discharged his weapon at the suspect. The second scene being the discharge of the weapon by both officers, where the suspect was struck at that time. The officers, as you can see in the video, were obviously very stunned, and you could see that they were going through a lot at that moment, but they still had the wherewithal to start recognizing. They checked themselves to find whether or not either of them were struck. As I said, it turns out the officer was struck in the holster. The officers then started changing gears to render first aid. The officer started asking people in the street for towels, for water. The officer for gloves. They began putting gloves on, and they started to examine the defendant when he was on the ground. The police department also has trauma kits that were recently donated by a very generous benefactor, and the officers immediately began yelling for the responding police cars to go into their trunks and get these trauma kits, and began rendering first aid with the trauma kits, as well as immediately calling for an ambulance. This, again reiterates a situation where our officers, doing what they do every day, are out, being present, visible, and engaged in the public, and they witnessed a very heinous, cold-blooded murder of a 63-year-old man, and did their job with professionalism and diligence, and pursued a very heavily armed suspect who had already shown a propensity for murder, as well as an attempt to kill police officers on multiple occasions. With that, we'll take any questions. Yeah, we'll send them out officially, but it's Officer Jake McKenzie and Officer Ho Tran. We'll send that out officially. In the body camera video, I forgot to mention in the release, you see video from 2 other officers, an officer, Stephen Clapp, and Joshua Aponte. They were on a call just down the street, about a block or so away, at the grocery store dealing with another incident. The reason that we released that body camera is because you can very clearly hear the 5 gunshots, which was the gunshots from the homicide. So that's why we released that video, so that you can hear the audio of those cameras. They had their cameras rolling because they were on an active call at that time, and then immediately proceeded to that location where they were still looking for the other officers, and you can hear on the audio on their cameras where one of the officers screams into the radio that he's shooting at us. They were responding to try to find the location of the officers, and then realized that they observed an individual that was down on the ground. I'm not going to get into the motive when the time is right. That'll be something for the district attorney to comment on. I'm not going to comment on that right now. So we're still going through all that. We believe the number of rounds was 21 between the 2 different scenes, but we are still going through that.
How about the scene where the suspect was shot?
It appears that one officer fired, Officer Tran fired 5 rounds at that scene, and it appears that there were 8 rounds fired by Officer McKenzie at the scene where he was ultimately shot. Yes. Well, we have the 5 rounds that were fired at the homicide scene. There was the 1 round in the windshield, and I don't have a number of the rounds that were alleged to have been fired at the officers during the foot pursuit. The gun that he had, I'm told, has the ability to carry 10 rounds in the magazine. It's a Glock 30, which is a .45 caliber Glock handgun.
Commissioner, do you believe that this video shows that it was justified shooting by?
I believe that the actions that the officers took were within the confines of the law and within the confines of department policy with relation to the use of deadly physical force. And it also shows the fact that the officers, which is in our manual procedures on the preservation of life, did everything they could with the equipment they had to render first aid.
You mentioned the 2 officers that had the body cam footage, or a couple go around like routine duty, but then they turn on the body cam footage as this incident was unfolding. Is that standard procedure in terms of just if something they believe is going to escalate a little further, then maybe they might click on the body cam footage, or how did that kind of all transpire?
So the officers that discharged their weapons, they did not have their body cameras activated because they were on routine patrol. They were not on an active call, and our policy does not mandate officers keep their cameras on active recording. The cameras are not designed for a 10-hour shift of actual active recording at all times. The batteries will die. It's too much video. The officers, when they are responding to a call, and if there is not a danger to themselves, and you have to keep in mind they're on routine patrol, immediately pulled up on a shooting homicide, and within split seconds have a bullet coming through, one of the officers actually end up being hit. They have to turn their cameras on as soon as it is safe to do so, and I applaud them for getting their cameras on as quickly as they did while they were in a foot pursuit. So we have video that we would not have had before because they got their cameras on. No, our department is not equipped with dashboard cameras. The holster was hit. There's a bullet hole, we believe to be a bullet hole in that holster, and like I said, a slug was recovered at the scene.
Condition of the suspect?
Stable. And as I said before, the suspect is on active parole for possession of a gun, and he was in possession of a gun and had an extreme willingness to use that gun, not only on the average citizen who was sitting out on Broadway Avenue, but also against our police officers. And that's, again, as I said the other day, I have a serious problem with that.
And then, it was fairly quickly that we got this body camera footage. Why have we not gotten body camera footage from the incident in March when 3 officers were shot?
So we're working on that. There's a substantial amount of video when it comes to that scene. We know that we had numerous scenes. I believe it was 19 different crime scenes. We had multiple officers that were involved in discharging their weapons. That's not the average everyday scenario. I think we've shown that this department will be very transparent and release what we can, when we can, as soon as we can. This is now, I think, the 3rd video that's been released in what I feel to be very quick fashion. We are actively working on that as we speak. And just to give you a little insight, the video that we released today, and it's a new style of release to be, what I feel to be more professional. It takes time to do that, and we're working through that. We are working through that video now, and the intent is to have that released very soon. There was a combination. There were fireworks that were going off. You can hear if you pay attention enough. There were, fireworks that were going off. Whether any of the others were gunfire, I don't know. And that's, part of the issue of, was some of that captured of the suspect firing? I can't say if that was the part of the video that you're referring to, but there were fireworks that were going off, and there's a lot of people out on the streets as well. I mean, this suspect, part of the use of deadly physical force justification in New York State law is a danger to the public. Obviously, this defendant exhibited that dangerousness to the defendant, and further on at the end of that block, there were people out on the sidewalk. This situation had to be terminated as quickly as possible.
Yeah, we heard officers telling those people to go inside. So you believe that more people could have been injured perhaps if officers didn't take that action?
I fully believe so. I mean, looking at the actions of the defendant, and it was Officer Aponte who, when he got out of the car and he went after where the officers were, his partner, Officer Clapp, went to the attempt to go to the aid of the deceased, but the officer, very consciously taking notice of people out there, was telling them, "Get back in your house, get back in your house." So yes, it was a very dangerous situation.
I just want to make clear, just so I can make sure that I get it right. So the reason why there's not video from inside the car or up until the chase was because they did not apply for a gun because it was not at that point an active situation. Is that correct?
Correct. They're on routine patrol, and it's not policy to keep their cameras on. They activate it as soon as they could, which is the policy, to activate it as soon as you can if you happen upon a situation. They just happened upon that situation. They were out there on patrol where they needed to be, where they should be. We have our officers out, in the areas that that are a propensity for violence. It's part of our micro hotspot crime plan. We're trying to be in places to be present, visible, and engaged in as many places as possible. And they were out there doing their job like our officers are doing every day.
Commissioner, the release of body cam footage has become more and more prevalent, I think, across the nation, but, also with the Buffalo Police Department, but with this new system that you're going to be using via YouTube, just can you talk about that decision and also what made you tell the department to release this type of video in terms of just putting it out to the public so everybody can see it?
There's other major city police departments, there's other police departments across the country that use a YouTube channel. Seen that, thought it was a great idea. We wanted to get ourselves to that point to do that. Like I said, getting the video together with, with factual detail, not opinionated detail, but factual detail. It takes time to do that, and that comes as an expense as well.
In terms of just using the video and releasing that body cam footage as, some way to kind of help provide context to the public, just how important is that to be able to get that out there, and whether it's to back your department up or provide a little more detail as to helping people kind of understand?
Yeah, it is. It's, you look in the past and it was, the police departments would put out a statement and this is what happened, and then that information would go into a court. There have been unfortunately situations where, police officers have been shown to be on the wrong side of the law. We now have body cameras, and there's been significant investments in police departments across the country to have that video evidence so that it is no longer, a he said, she said type of scenario. We now have that video. We can, be the producers of our own show, if you will, for lack of a better term, to show, no, this is exactly what happened, and this is what's happening. It professionalizes our police department, it professionalizes our police officers, and it holds the public more accountable as well.
The suspect, can you release any more information about his history? When was he paroled, and, original charges, that kind of stuff?
So the best of the information I have is back in November of 2014, he was arrested by this police department for possession of a gun. There were some other circumstances. I believe he was convicted in 2015 of that. I believe that was the time frame. He served a prison sentence and then was put on post-release supervision. There are other things that I won't get into, violations that you can look up through the parole system, some violations and some other incidents. You'll be able to locate that, but he, as of this date, is still on active parole for that original charge, and I don't know if there's other charges that may have extended part of his sentencing.
Is there anything other besides that gun arrest? Anything else?
It's my understanding that on a parole check a few years back that he was found in possession of another handgun. He was violated on his parole at that point. In further information, I believe that weapon was found to be inoperable, so it could not be prosecuted like he was the first time, but again, another propensity for having a gun.
Anyone else? We all good?
Curious about the Supreme Court decision, and do you think, I know it just came about, but do you have any sense of what it might mean for policing, for gun violence on the street, for safety on the streets, or anything like that?
You know, I know that decision just came out. I really haven't had time to digest it. I caught the headline, so I really don't want to comment at this time until I've had more of an opportunity to digest it. We've actually been working on this to try to get this critical incident debriefing out, so it wouldn't be fair for me to comment on this right now. I haven't digested it at all. That will be, so we'll using the ATF. We have a very strong partnership with our federal partners in the ATF. That gun is going through, and they may have that information already, but it's being traced. We'll trace it back to the origin. We'll also look at any NIBIN hits, so shell casing evidence that we collect on any shots fired. We'll be able to trace the history of that gun if it was used in any other crime. So that's something that's being investigated as well. So any charges as to what they will be in addition. So an arrest warrant was taken out on, I believe it was Saturday, it might have been Friday night, but an arrest warrant alleging attempted murder in the first degree of a police officer was sworn out to hold the defendant that night. Any other charges, what they are and when they will be released, will come by way of the district attorney's office when it's appropriate at that time, so I'm not going to comment on those additional charges. Yeah, those went out, I think Sunday those went out.
Anyone else? We clear on everything? I know there's a lot of stuff here with the body cam footage. We all good? All right, thanks everyone. I believe if you want to hold tight, the mayor will be here in a few minutes on the Supreme Court decision. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.